so that should be coming around soon, where we'll be supporting Neem wallets. And but we're expanding out based on demand, and some, we have a Dash coin. Some of the wallets that we make are more popular than others, but the Bitcoin and Ethereum are the most popular. And with those coins that you have in your hand, you can load any Ethereum-based token on those. But those are samples, something for you to have and enjoy. And we manufactured those for the Blockchain World Conference back in July, which Bobby and I met at that conference. And ever since then, we've fallen in bromance, and we talk and hang out, and we're deciding how we can help revolutionize the world, basically. And so the essence of this particular conversation is going to be based on the philosophical nature of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and its relationship to human beings, and where we've been, where we're going, and the nature of money.
I have to tell you, he's talking about a bromance, but we didn't meet at the Blockchain World Conference. We already knew each other.
Oh, that's right. We met.
See, he doesn't even remember. See,
we had like a 5-hour
It's like missing your
lunch
anniversary or something. I just don't understand it.
in Canton, Georgia.
Yes, that's exactly right. We met in Canton, Georgia.
Canton, Georgia.
Which is something. But I was listening to Kurt talk about cold storage coin. And the marketing aspect is important. But this is one of the ways that him and I connected, because of the philosophical side of what's in your hand. One of the reasons why we like to have people to see these is so they learn more about Bitcoin, number one. But this is, it's a wallet. And one of the things that I talk about all the time is, one of the things I try and do all the time is to make it simple for everybody. Now, most of the people who are here, both in this room and in this conference, are more educated into cryptocurrency space and the blockchain space. But this is a tool here that allows for people to understand literally the philosophy and the empowerment of cryptocurrency as a monetary item in the world. Because, as we know, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is money. It's just money. And we hear all the talk that goes on in our society and all the worries and things like that, but Bitcoin is just another form of cash. It's a peso, it's a euro, it's a dollar bill. It has its value, like all the other ones do, against each other. But from that standpoint, it allows for people to, not worry about all the talk, all the investment side of things, and it's just a way to do peer-to-peer. And that's something that is very important in both our beliefs, and one of the reasons why we decided to get together and have this conversation is it's a reminder, essentially, of what the original vision was for Bitcoin, why it's so important, and not from the standpoint of rhetoric, not from the standpoint of, privacy, this, that, and the other thing, but the empowerment side of it for me, and I know that it's very important for you. And this item, because we've talked about this, so I want you to, if you will, just talk about how this shows empowerment besides the marketing aspect of it, just the actual use of it and what it's for, in your view. Tell everybody why it's an empowering tool, both the Bitcoin and this wallet, and how it shows them.
Okay, well, the empowerment of cryptocurrencies, I think the important thing to understand is the nature of money in that respect, and how money is used to coerce and control people, and essentially enslave them through taxation and different ways that money can be manipulated for the benefit of those who create money. And that's really been the big struggle in terms of economic freedom. And economic freedom cannot happen with a centralized system. It's just impossible, because the centralized system controls the dynamics of that money, the amount that's in circulation and the interest rates that are involved. So imagine, like in the United States, there's been an undercurrent battle in the U.S. since its inception that we've had 3 central banks in its history, and I don't know how many people know about the economic history of the U.S. and the battle over that for control. But Jefferson eradicated the first central bank, and then Andrew Jackson eradicated the second central bank, and then we had a kind of a coup d'etat in the early 20th century with a group of bankers that went down to the coast of Georgia on an island called Jekyll Island. There's a book called Creature from Jekyll Island, and these bankers wrote the 16th Amendment. And that 16th Amendment gave them the control over the currency, and now the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private company, issues the U.S. currency, which is now the global currency. And the relationship between decisions that are made by the U.S. government on a global scale, wars, the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, the war on impoverished people, the war on minorities, all of that is, is funded. Those decisions that legislators make is funded by a fiat currency that has limitless supply. So in terms of empowerment, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are not controlled by an individual group entity. And in that respect, it has a decentralized nature to it. And it also is not controlled by individual banks that create a ledger and transfer money between each other. It also is not controlled by a transfer system. So what Bitcoin has essentially done is it's a threefold service. It's not just a digital asset like fiat currencies are, but it's a digital asset that's built on a ledger, and it has its own transaction system. So it has 3 different things going on. An asset, digital asset, that's limited in its supply, vitally important. I know this stuff sounds kind of, it might be redundant for some people, but it's also, in terms of empowerment, having a currency, money is about relationship. It's about communication. It's about human interaction. At the end of the day, money is used for people to relate to one another on some level, and an exchange of services and goods. And
best analogy that I can think of is barter system.
Yeah, barter system, right? So having and Bitcoin right now is the I mean, it was the first cryptocurrency that worked, and it's been under development, or this idea has been under development for quite a long time. It didn't start in 2009. It started in the 90s, maybe even earlier than that with cypherpunks. But the thing about what happened with Bitcoin, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is that governments issue fiat currencies, and they also have mandates that you can't have competing currencies. In the U.S., you can have community currencies, and I might talk a little bit about how our company has created community currencies for different communities in the U.S. legally. Our CEO actually was invited to testify before the U.S. monetary policy hearing on competing currencies because of that, and he called the Federal Reserve Bank a den of thieves on the congressional floor. But he, when we started, I lost my train of thought on that.
Well, so we can stop there. It'll come back to you. Yeah. So from the standpoint of, like I mentioned, the barter system, for example, looking at the empowerment side of it.
Yeah.
So essentially, you mentioned all of the industrial complexes. We have so many of them: military, educational, prison, all of them. It's insane what goes on. But looking at the poor, for example, from an empowerment standpoint, Bitcoin solves their monetary issues without having anyone be in control on how well they do other than themselves. And that's the empowerment side. Me personally, it is my goal. One of the organizations that I founded is called We Do Better. And it's not that we do better, it's that we do better than the government, essentially, is what the model is. And we do better in providing public benefits to the communities than the government. And we base it on data, et cetera. So empowerment's my thing. It has been forever. So when Bitcoin was created, and I'm listening to this, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the automatic advocate. And it's important that people understand what Kurt is talking about in the sense of how the relationship side of it works and how it empowers from the standpoint of poor. So give an example of how that works simply. Something that we can tell the world, and they'll get it right away.
Well, let's start with what you mentioned about people that are impoverished, people that are poor in the U.S. Let's just specifically talk about that. The Federal Reserve Bank issues more and more currency every year, and people that are on a fixed income or on Social Security or on a retirement program, or they're on some sort of social financial aid, the increase for their income does not meet the increase of inflation. And that's a simple...
that's been going on forever.
It's been going on for a long time. And the problem with that is that there is a hidden tax in the U.S. system, which is an inflation tax. And that inflation tax is not something that we notice on the face because it isn't something that's legislated on a regular basis. It's just built into inflation. So, as there's more U.S. dollars in circulation, the value goes down of the U.S. dollar and the cost of goods goes up. And that's a basic thing. Why does milk go up every year? Why do certain, toilet paper, why does the cost of these things increase? And it increases because the money supply is being manipulated. So the people that are on a fixed income, if somebody's making $1,500 a year, I'm sorry, a month, on retirement, it's going to be a struggle for them in a few years because they're just not making enough to live on because of inflation. Deflation is the real empowerment here. And so from a larger perspective, if Bitcoin right now, I think all of this stuff is speculative, just like anything speculative, because we don't know what the future is, so that's what speculative means. Sure. We can't predict the future. But if Bitcoin becomes a universal currency, the volatility of it will level out because there will be mass wallet adoption at that point.
Well, you mentioned taxes, for example. So everybody, I'd just like you to think for a second, how many things, the cost that everybody in this room has just to have their money, just to use your money. Forget even the taxation side of it. Just look at bank fees. I was thinking about this the other day, looking at gas stations. One of the things that annoys me is if you go down the street, the gas prices are 13, 15 cents. Literally, you're down the street. And then you get to think about all the fees that are involved. And then you get to think about, well, if you use a credit card, now it's that much more. And now you look at the poor communities who is struggling, and they're pushing us into the credit world. They've been doing this for decades as well, as everybody knows. You go into a gas station and you don't have cash on you because you don't have that much of it in the first place. And in order to buy gas for your car to get to work, you're getting charged. Not even tax. Forget the tax side of it. Just to use your money, you're seeing an increase, and it's your money in order to buy gas. I almost got to thinking. I got to thinking about New Jersey the other day because New Jersey, I believe, is the only state in the country that mandates full-service gas stations. And I was thinking, why don't you just make them all full-service? Because if you're going to have to pay more money, why should you get out of your car? It's just absurd. But if you think about the fees that you have in your life just to have money, without even going to the tax side of it, just to bank and stuff like that, Bitcoin eliminates all of that.
It does, but on the empowerment side, this is a hard sell because in order to adopt Bitcoin at this point, there are third-party services. There is concern about that with what happened with the
190 million, or
Yeah.
the
So-
guy dies and if nobody doesn't know what that is, the gentleman died and nobody has the password for 190 million, I believe it is.
That's right. So in terms of this particular position, it's a lifestyle change. I mean, it's a way of life. In order to be involved in cryptocurrency, you have to self-bank. I mean, from my perspective, it's sort of like holding your own gold.
Well, it
that
goes
point.
back around to the cold storage coin. Because people will say, well, what if you lose it? Or what if somebody steals it? Well, that happens with your own wallet that you have in your, it's no different. But again, it's a lifestyle change. And they're like, well, I just don't get it. You know, but it's exactly what he's talking about here.
Yeah, but it goes on to some fundamental ideas. One is property rights. And when you talk about these transactions, every time there's a transaction that occurs, at least in the U.S., there is a tax.
Yeah, every time.
So they've got the overlords, you know, and their thugs taxing every transaction. When I go eat at a restaurant, sometimes I'll ask the server, which amount should I should I tip on? Should I tip on the pre-taxed amount or the post-taxed
Sure.
amount? Which one is fair? Because that relationship, that exchange between the customer and the restaurant, the government has nothing to do with that.
Right, and
They
yet
just-
they're involved in it.
they're
They're
getting-
deeply involved in it, right?
Right, they get their cut.
Yeah.
And so that's the big question, is this issue about taxes. And but when we deal with government, there is a trap door always with fiat currency. And this happened in the 30s with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where he confiscated the gold. And all Americans were to give up their gold. And there were a lot of Americans that didn't give up their gold. And they were put in jail, or they were fined
Well,
an extreme amount of money.
It's a great example. Moving away from the United States for a second, if everybody's paying attention to the politics, not every, as much as we can stomach it. So the United States just advocated to London to not give Maduro in Venezuela his gold that he owns. I mean, regardless of how you feel or don't feel about a particular person, you were talking about property rights, essentially.
Yep.
And they own this, and you have a government saying, no, you can't have it because we disagree with you. Right, wrong, and different. It's crazy. So, again, back to empowerment.
That's right. And so when Roosevelt closed the banks in 1933, at that point, everything changed with the U.S. dollar. You could exchange it for gold.
Right.
Until he outlawed ownership of gold
Right.
by American citizens. This is in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, this.
Well, we have indefinite detention here, so we have a lot of funny things going on in this country that a lot of people don't realize. So yeah, I get it.
But it's a fundamental question of property rights. Do you own your property, or can the government seize it? And does Bitcoin empower individuals to not be forced to give up their wealth?
And that's a
And
great
how
word
does that
for
work?
cryptocurrency, because there's a lot of discussion about force in crypto and in blockchain, and I would say to you that this is the anti-force, without a doubt.
That's right. And so the thing that I'd forgotten about, which I think is the most interesting thing about this whole deal, why is everybody sitting in this room? Why are you here? Why are the people that attend these conferences attending the conferences? What is the whole purpose of this whole deal? And what is it that motivates everyone? And I think that that's really the key question. Is it the technology, or is it the reason for the technology?
Right.
And in my case, it's freedom. Yeah. I want to be free. I want to be as free as possible, and I don't want to be told how to live my life, and I don't want to be forced to give up my hard-earned income. I don't want to be. I don't want to be
Forced.
a slave
Yeah.
to the state, and that's my own personal belief. But the thing about Bitcoin versus a nationally issued currency is that nobody is being forced to own Bitcoin.
Right.
Nobody is coerced into that. And so it's a spontaneous thing that's happening. It's voluntary. Adoption of Bitcoin is the reason for the adoption of Bitcoin. Some people like to buy and sell it, as
Well,
a
investing is okay. It's a personal choice.
right.
as
It's
you
for
said.
trading. But what is the reason that a lot of people are what I would call transitioning into Bitcoin, or what is it that would motivate them to do that? It's because of the nature of it. It's because it isn't issued by a state, and
Or a bank, or
that's right,
yeah.
or a bank, and it's not controlled by a third party.
And you don't have cost against it to have the relationship, to use it. We know that exchanges, but peer to peer, there's nothing. I can hear.
Yeah,
And that's really important, in my view, from the standpoint of empowerment and from the standpoint of people enriching themselves in a monetary fashion with the economics of our world, getting back to the poor people, because of the fees they have to pay just to buy gas. If the gas station took Bitcoin, it changes that whole dynamic. And they save money that they shouldn't have to worry about by the nature of the currency.
yeah, and in terms of spreading wallet adoption, I think that right now my biggest concern about this change or this shift, transition, is whether or not we're ready for it. And we've maintained under 1% wallet adoption, ownership in Bitcoin globally, and there's like 7.5 billion people in the world.
And there's a lot of them that are poor, and a lot of them that can't. I believe the percentage is 35% or something like that, that people who don't have access to banks or don't bank, or there's no relationship, for example. That's a lot of people we're talking about here.
That's true. And but what I would say that my fear, if anybody would ask me what my fear is about Bitcoin, is that we adopt globally too quickly, and then systems collapse, and it causes chaos around the world. So what is that tipping point? What is it that happens when the FOMO reaches that level? Is it 10% ownership, where people start to see their fiat currency failing and declining in value so quickly because
and you need to clarify, because what you're talking about is the impact
the
of
mass
Bitcoin.
exodus into crypto of
so
their
it's not
fiat
that Bitcoin
currencies.
is bad, it's that what will happen to the other
It's just the relationship
Yeah.
of human nature
Yeah.
when people realize that I better get out of my yen or euro or US dollar and get into Bitcoin, Litecoin, whatever the cryptocurrencies are in that society that are being used. And so we're pushing for mass wallet adoption, but at the same time I wonder what that would look like, and how long is it going to take for that to happen? Is that transition going to be is it going to be rough? I don't know.
I saw an interesting graphic this morning that to me is an analogy to a lot of this. There was a comment made that the United States now is the world's greatest oil producer, and at the bottom of the graphic it said, so America is going to invade America. And so when you talk about the reaction to things, to me that's a very good analogy, because we know what we do. Anybody who's paying attention can see the domino effect, and you can really just pick a subject. Of course, Bitcoin impacts every single one of these subjects, because everything, as Kurt was talking about earlier, and he laid the foundation to the discussion, is money controls everything. So it is a major concern about any kind of reaction collapsing. And I get it. I guess one of the things I would say back is that, well, yes, I could see the collapsing and the chaos, but I also can see that there's a good foundation that would be there, that it would bounce off of a little bit, that would still be sustainable. But again, it's still, I mean, everybody could be dead. Somebody might push the button, as they say. But from a monetary standpoint, there still would be a base that would be able to withstand anything on that side, which is a good thing, of course. But chaos is. What did Brandon Stark say? Chaos is a ladder.
Well, I would say that the true chaos is what governments do to individuals.
Yeah.
And usurping their freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real chaos. That's the violent nature of government is the underlying impact on individuals, and it doesn't matter what government it is. That collective idea that this particular group of individuals know what's best for everybody else, for me is a dangerous notion. But it's only capable if you have a fiat currency that they force everyone to use. And so
tax and make use,
right.
And all those little features that we've been talking about, sure.
Sure. And so we talk about, there's an issue around a wall being built right now, and whether or not you like that idea. I think that what happens with cryptocurrency is it doesn't have a system of borders.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And so borders are irrelevant.
And
so
that touches on property rights too, because you're seeing, for example, again, it doesn't matter what your view of something of this nature is. For me personally, I don't like borders at all. Period. And people will say, "What about the sovereignty?" It has nothing to do with sovereignty, but they're taking property to do this, eminent domain. They're taking. There's lawsuits that aren't even talked about. I love our media. Aren't even talked about because people are battling to keep their property. There's a process that has to go on, et cetera, and then process is horrible anyway, in order to keep their property. So if they, just think about it. So there's a process which shouldn't exist, but they're not even following the process, and they're doing that wrong, which is a procedural due process aspect of argument. But it goes right back to the fact that they're just taking. And in the Bitcoin world, it's something that they don't get to do.
So there's a little story I want to share with you guys. I'm sure you guys have heard of Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway, the writer, he wrote Old Man and the Sea and a bunch of other books. Famous American author. Well, he had a brother who some say was a better writer than him, and his name is Lester. And Lester Hemingway is one of my personal heroes. He started his own micronation under a treaty called the Montevideo Treaty, which Montevideo, Uruguay, is what it's named after. And under the Montevideo Treaty, anyone in this room can start their own nation. And all you need is a mass in international waters, like a land mass, and some bat guano, and then you're good to go. And you can create your own country. And so that's what he did. Lester Hemingway took a bunch of rafts and pieced them together, anchored it down with a Ford engine block, and outside of Jamaica, just in the international waters. And then he created his own stamps, and he created his own currency. And what he did to make his own currency is he scavenged the bottom of the ocean, got the bottle caps and shells and rocks, and he called that scruples, because he felt like rich people needed scruples too. And that's the story of Lester Hemingway. And so he created his own currency, and basically, I mean, it was a thriving 8-person nation until a hurricane, swept it away. And
no infrastructure, huh?
Well, he made a second nation, but the point of that is that it's sort of this thumbing your nose at the establishment in as direct a way as possible, and so to me the funny part is how he made his money, how he created his money, and it obviously, fiat currency is just paper. And what people who don't understand anything about cryptocurrency is that we're already using digital currency for the most part.
All the time.
The paper manifestation of it is a representation of the digital asset that is the U.S. dollar or any other
And another
government.
way that you're charged to use your money, of course, by the banking system and by the government.
Right. So we're already using digital currency. So the transition should not be difficult to understand. I think the hard part that for people to understand is that when you hold your cryptocurrency, you hold it.
Yeah.
And unless you're using a third party that has your private keys,
Right.
and you don't, then you do not own that cryptocurrency. So if something happens with that company,
Right.
your crypto is gone.
Right.
And that's why I think it's important in terms of empowerment that people understand that getting into this thing means that you are personally responsible for your asset.
Which ultimately, I mean, if you think about that, I mean, why wouldn't you be? You know, if you think about that, like a lot of us will say, well, I already am personally responsible for my money, but are you really? In the crypto sense, you certainly are. You know, a very, very smart young man that I know, Dan Johnson, told me once, and I totally agree with this, that if you look at any situation, no matter what it is, and you add liberty to the discussion and you turn it on to yourself or you use it, it doesn't really matter what the discussion is, liberty always wins because we all want to be free, ultimately. And I look at Bitcoin in that sense as a liberty instrument. You know, Kurt was talking about wanting to be free, and I totally agree with that. It is about liberty. It is about, and empowerment is about liberty as well. So when you have a situation where you're able to do things on your own, what is more empowering than that? You know, we all hear about, you know, teach our children. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, you know, and I want my children and my grandchildren to be able to do whatever they want, however they want to do it, and as long as they're not doing harm to anybody else, go for it. And with Bitcoin, they don't even have to associate with anybody else, if you think about that, from the standpoint of relationships. And you know, you can have it, you can hold it, you can do whatever you want of it, and you can spend it, and you don't have to pay money in your life to do it. Now, we all know about the SEC and the IRS. These are areas that I spend a lot of time in. I sit on the committees for American Bar Association as well, and I work with Randall here with the Government Blockchain Association, and as much as I can. And my goal there, again, goes back to what I was saying earlier, is to make it simple for everybody. You know, you hear the phrases security token, utility token. If you remove the word token, which you should, it's just another investment thing. You know, this goes on every single day in the stock exchange and in the commodities exchange in Chicago. I mean, they trade corn. You know, they trade oil. You know, these things fluctuate every single day. You know, if you think about the movie Trading Places, frozen orange, which of course they don't do, but they do oranges. You know, gold and platinum and silver and things like that. Well, again, from the commodity standpoint, that's all that's happening with Bitcoin. The SEC, you know, they talk about, you know, being consumer protecting. You know, they're protecting consumers, and that's fine. So if you're going to go into ICOs, you're going to go into creating the security. I don't even use the word token anymore. There's no, if you're creating a security, there are rules. If you do a compliance thing, they're never going to bother you. The only time you ever hear anything is the time when people are doing it and not following their rules, which are pretty simple. And you know, there's a lot of work to do, but it's pretty simple what they're asking you to do to stay out of trouble. And then we work to change it from within, because you know, again, we're talking about Big Brother. You know, so ideally, I don't want to advocate. Don't pay attention to them, because then you go into jail. Well, that's not going to help. You know, I would rather see everybody succeed, and let's change it within, because that's another thing that Bitcoin's going to do. It gives people power. Remember, like you think of cannabis. I work in the cannabis anti-prohibitionist for, I think, since I was born. And one of the problems that we see is that nobody is lobbying, or now, just recently there is, but nobody's spending money. That's an issue for cryptocurrency as well, as far as moving regulation, but we don't need to do that with Bitcoin, because we control the money. Would you agree?
Well, you know, it depends on what country you're in.
Well,
and what kind of,
yes, of
you know,
course. I was thinking here.
laws that they have. Well, It depends on. It also depends on how it's issued and how it's distributed out.
Right.
So when we get into altcoins, I don't have an expertise on the legalities of ownership of that, and I think it's still in development. But what was exciting to me when Bitcoin came on the scene, I remember in 2009, October 2009, when the first transaction happened, and then Bitcoin actually had a value.
Yeah.
It was very little, but it had a value. And it was exciting to me because this was something different, and it was not, at least at the time, I thought governments can't control this.
Right.
There's no way.
Immediately, I did the same thing.
There's no way it can be controlled by government. So individuals can be empowered, and money can be decentralized, and deflation can happen, and the cost of goods can go down, and people can live their lives without having to worry about being forced to behave in a certain way or live in a certain way, and but it's a very complicated thing with human nature and the relationship that governments have with one another and their citizens. And so I don't know how this is going to unfold. I don't know.
So
it is, in certain countries it's illegal to own.
Yeah.
In Japan, Bitcoin is a currency. Yeah. It's legal currency in Japan, and our company is based in Singapore. We're heavy in Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and we have a strong presence there. But people understand it a lot more than they do in the United States. There's a lot of propaganda in the United States. There's a lot of fear about it. People look at it as an investment rather than a currency. And so, one of the things that I think is happening is that Americans they just don't understand it so much. And how do we overcome that? And what is it that is the impediment for people to adopt cryptocurrency? What is it that keeps people from even looking at Bitcoin? And I would say probably two things. One is fear, and the other is time. And so people don't have time because they're living busy lives to educate themselves on it. And there's this fear of the unknown, which is kind of a natural human thing.
It's even worse than that, if you think about it. We live in a polarized society. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole, of course, but we live in a polarized society. We live in if you spend 20 minutes involved in our media cycle, I just run. I don't give them 20 minutes, essentially. I do a lot of reading. But the misinformation that we get, and you just pick a subject. So we're talking about this subject, and all of the networks are covering it to some degree at some time. Some of them more than others. Some of them devote shows to it, and then the show is devoted to banging it, to bashing it. And yet here we are. So it's more than just the fear of the unknown, because we can both. We could talk to family members. We could talk to people that respect us in other areas. We both are educated, so we have people in our lives that come to us and ask us anything, there's a bunch of different things. And we bring this subject up, well, what about, and they're totally indoctrinated against it, like something else in their life, that has happened. And so it's a little bit more than the unknown, unfortunately. And it goes back to what you were saying about the fear and collapse and things like that.
Well, what's interesting about fear is that fear and excitement are really the same emotion. So when we get on a roller coaster, it's exciting, it's scary. You ask a girl out on a date, it's exciting, it's scary. Or a guy, if you ask a guy out on a date, depending on who you are.
Politically correct? Did you just do something?
Hey man, I don't know. I'm all inclusive. So
me too.
Fear and excitement are this. It's just a perspective. It's how we look at it. Yeah. And I went to a family reunion back in May of last year, and I brought a bunch of these coins with me, Bitcoin coins, and one of my brothers. Well, both of them actually are police officers. And one of them said to me across the dinner table, we're being trained to deal with your cryptocurrency criminal world. And I just wanted to let you know that.
The dark web.
Yeah, the evil Bitcoin owners. And I said, well, that's interesting, because I had a bunch of these. And what I had done was written the name of each family member on the back and how much I had loaded onto the coin. And then I handed them out to everyone about an hour later. And it's as if I had just given everybody tickets to the circus for the first time, and they're seeing, clowns and fire breathers and trapeze artists and all the excitement of going to a circus for the first time or whatever. And they started to reverse learn. What I had done was bypassed the time and the fear, and the effort that they don't have to get an education in blockchain technology or any of that kind of stuff, and they just started reverse learning on their own. Everybody downloaded a hot wallet, and they started asking questions about how do you buy it and what do we, yeah, it was exciting.
Learn.
And it was a simple way to spread wallet adoption, and suddenly we had a new group of people. And guess who came up to me and was sitting right next to me asking me all kinds of questions. How do you download a hot wallet? Can you transfer some Bitcoin to my hot wallet? My brother, my 6'4" cop brother, So and then about an hour later, he comes up to me and he puts his arms around me and gives me a hug. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? And because we don't do that. And he says, listen, I want to thank you for giving me and my family Bitcoin, because he has 3 kids and a wife. And he said, I'm going to put this in my safe and I'm going to learn about it. And I'm sorry for, busting your chops earlier. And I said, that's just what we do. Yeah. And he says, but I have one question for you. Why did you give Mom more Bitcoin than me? And I said, because I love her more than I love you. And that was,
Mom's
but it was
always
just,
number one.
Yeah, but it's cool because what happened is he is programmed as a police officer to look at this in a certain way.
He's government.
Right.
Policy.
And exactly. But this just eliminated that. It melted it away because it's a physical coin, which people identify money with something physical, and it's a way to have physical cryptocurrency. And so in terms of fear, it really doesn't take much to convert that into excitement.
Well, I give you an example of something that happened last year. So I was working on a political campaign for Attorney General of Kansas. And the candidate has cryptocurrency. And of course, anything that I'm involved with, that I advocate, whatever the subject is, I go down the list. So when the website was created, we put the Bitcoin wallet on it for donations from cryptocurrency. So as it turned out, in December, the Secretary of State's office in the state of Kansas decided not to let Bitcoin be used as part of the campaign donations because they said, and this is really important to give you an idea how government works and misinformation. So they said that they don't want any anonymous money coming in, so they eliminated Bitcoin being used as a donation. Now, the reason that it's important, and I emphasize this, is because the rules on how donations are taken are established by the state, not established by the person who's donating the money. I don't care what you're donating. You could be donating a car. It doesn't matter. Bitcoin is just another form. You could be donating whatever. So the state is the one that says, okay, if you're going to donate $200, you have to do this. $5, you have to do this. So for them to say that we can't have this because we don't want anonymous donors is absurd, because you could do that with any money. It doesn't matter. So they've eliminated a whole class of individuals that would want to see somebody be Attorney General who supports for the reasons that we talk about, to let freedom reign. And they didn't let it happen at all. And that is a great example. I always use that since this happened. This was just this last election cycle, and she still got 400,000 votes, damn it. But yeah, it gives a great example of how the government lied. That whole thing is manipulation, because they create the rules and then they say, well, we're not going to do it because of the rule. It's absurd.
We have just a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, yes.
Couldn't an exception be like you could still tie a blockchain address to a person, and especially if they paid through BitPay, it could be tied to an email, so it wouldn't be an anonymous donation. I just think that could be a rebuttal to that, you know?
That's right.
Well, yeah, totally. But the thing is in order to, so you put up, when you're in a political campaign, you put up how, PayPal, it doesn't matter how you're doing it, but you put up the rules you say, okay, I want to donate $20. Well, if the rules say that that person has to put their name, et cetera, in there, it's not, the donor's not trying, the rules say that it has to be, now, yes, we could lie, of course, you could lie on a thing, but it's absurd for them to say, when they are the ones that create the rules, that we can't use Bitcoin because that's not how it works. It's not from the side of the donor, it's from the state rules. So every candidate has to do things a certain way.
You're right. I mean, as far as technologies is concerned, you can pay with any cryptocurrency and it be trackable to the individual. There's no reason why the government should be outlawing the ability to donate with Bitcoin. And I've worked for 20 national campaigns. I worked for Rand Paul. He was the first one to accept Bitcoin. And there is a precedent that's been set, and it isn't difficult to self-identify when donating. That happens all the time. But we did the money bombs for Ron Paul back in 2007 and on, and we would have the money bomb marathons, and people would donate, and their names would come up, and it was funny. The names, they were all fake, very creative, like FU government type names and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun back then. And so, anybody can put whatever they want into what their name is when they're donating with a credit card, but it's still tied back to them. There's a way to do that with technology and identification. Any other questions? I know this is an exciting panel.
So you had mentioned earlier how you were excited for the mass adoption of wallets, but you're kind of concerned if it occurred too quickly. My interpretation was because that might be seen as a threat to any government or any fiat currency, I guess. So by extension, government. So my question is, if the government already has control largely over public sector stuff like electricity, the grid, or at least in the United States, and there are, over the last 10 years, I know that there are several groups that have tried to prohibit the import of either solar panels or the goods that you would use to make solar panels in the United States. So I don't know if that's a conspiracy that just occurred in my head, or if that's actually something that is actually a threat to a mass adoption at one point. But I don't know if you see where, I think I'm kind of losing the train trying to put that together. But how do you face off with a government that has large control over the? I see a parallel between FDR taking gold and the United States government taking control of the electricity which we would need to access or create coins or any other kind of blockchain from.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is an us versus them thing in terms of my concern. It's more of how it's going to affect individuals. And in a transition like that, it's a herd mentality. So, for instance, Weimar Germany, when inflation was going out of control and people had wheelbarrows to go buy bread, wheelbarrows full of money to go buy bread, because the value went down. So that's the thought process there is that. But in terms of the control over energy, that could be a whole, that's a whole subject in and of itself, and that's a really important aspect. So in terms of this transition, how does it affect governments? What is their ability to deal with that? And that's where the chaos, we don't want that kind of chaos. We want this transition. I would like to see it be a slow transition of wallet adoption, just because of the adjustments that are going to have to be made by, the energy sector is a perfect example of that, and how governments would react to that. Also, military control. That's another thing that's a scary part of this whole deal. And so we don't know how it's going to play out.
I would say to you, just real quick, decentralization, period, is an issue, which is, and I work in the energy field a lot and with disaster relief, and decentralization is always going to be an issue to some degree with the government, and of course Bitcoin is a huge part of that.
check out Thomas Massey, Congressional Representative Thomas Massey in Kentucky, about the solar panels thing. It's an interesting thing, that the battle going on there. And he's got an interesting perspective on Twitter, since you just mentioned the solar panel thing. And he's a solar panel guy, but he's also a Republican, and he doesn't believe in mandating solar panel energy because of the flaws in the technology and the inability to heat your home in the winter and cool your home in the summer with solar panels. But it's a flaw in the technology in terms of battery power and that kind of thing. But that would be an interesting thing to explore.
All right, guys, we're going to get ready for the next talk. Round of applause for Bobby and Kurt. Thanks, guys. Got everyone's attention there.